Hi, everybody. Hi, PAX Online. Wherever you are, welcome to Improv in Role-Playing, how to run a game in the now. This is going to be a 1-hour panel. This is a panel that normally lives at PAX East, but since the concepts of space and time are relatively meaningless these days, we're happy to bring it to everyone at once. So what we're going to do for the next hour is talk about improvisation and kind of the art of improvisation and how you can use improv techniques to make your role-playing experience better, whether you're a GM or a player that's become a reluctant GM. Hopefully we can remove some of that reluctance by teaching you about the magic of improv and how it all lines up. We are going to, I'm going to introduce myself and then our august panel. And then we're just going to go from there. We will have questions at the end. So if anyone is in the Stream One Horse Theater Discord channel, feel free to ask questions at any time. We will get to as many of them as possible at the end of our panel. Sound good? Sound good. All right. So as far as who I am, my name is John Serpico. I'm going to be moderating. I've been a professional and semi-professional improviser and comedian for about 20 years. I've been playing and running role-playing games for about 25. These days, since ImprovBoston, my home theater, is currently closed because of, everything, I can be found GMing Knights of Prospect, which is a live play / improv powered by the Apocalypse role-playing game show on 2MB Studios on Twitch. Bobby, how about you?
Hi, I'm Bobby Smithney, former director of ImprovBoston Mainstage, current history teacher, and as we were discussing before this panel, beater of Battletoads. Just going to throw that one out there. So I got my nerd cred.
Melissa.
Oh, that was me. So I am a professional bard. I am the lead singer and guitar player in the band Minus World. I also am the director of education at the Company Theater in Norwell, Massachusetts. And I was a professional improviser for over 10 years and teach improv to children, teens, and adults now.
Awesome. Auston, how about you?
Hi, I'm Auston Habershaw. I am a college professor and a professional science fiction and fantasy author. I have a series of books out with Harper Voyager called The Saga of the Redeemed, and I've published a bunch of short stories and stuff. I've also done professional improv. I did it for about 5 years or so, a long time ago now. And I have been running and GMing games for approximately 30 years. And I've GM'd for everybody. I've run just about everything, and I don't shut up, so I'm going to shut up.
Sam, how about you?
Hi, I'm Sam. I'm an education researcher by day and by night, I suppose. I am a professional / semi-professional improviser doing long form and musical improv comedy at ImprovBoston. And I have also been playing and GMing games for the last 10 years or so, I would say.
So, audience, as you can see, a literal centuries of experience in the exact fields we want for this panel. So, I'm going to start essentially with 2 questions, and from those 2 questions, we're just going to kind of branch out from there. So, to make sure that everybody watching is on the same page as us, let's have question number 1 be a question of definition. So, the question is, what is improvisation?
Go ahead, Auston.
No, go ahead. I was going to defer to one of the people who are currently improvisers. So.
Sure. I think one of the things that people struggle with is this notion that improvisation means that you've got to act out and you've got to do voices and you have to, it must be a theatrical performance. But improvisation and role playing, to me, is really asking some of your fellow, performers really to be with you and create with you, is what I was going to say. It's not necessarily like I do the greatest voices or I, get up and do the greatest dances. Like it doesn't have to be that. It's the act of creating with your team and incorporating the other members of who are not the GM to be part of the creation process.
Yeah. I think a lot of people think of improv as the comedy side because they all see shows like Whose Line Is It Anyway? But in terms of, especially in applying it to gaming, but also improv as a theater art form, it's more like a heightened form of communication where you're not only just having a dialogue or a conversation with another person, you're also having a conversation or dialogue with the character you've created. So you're engaging with two different personalities at the same time. And in doing that, you can create more real, more rich conversations by inhabiting that in real time and not relying on a script.
I'd like to add that about improvisation, a lot of people say, "Oh my gosh, I could never do that." Like, of course you can. It's a skill that you practice with and get better. I like to talk about it as basketball. Like everyone can pick up a basketball and dribble it. Not everyone is LeBron James, but that doesn't mean that you can't do it, right? You can't learn it. It's a skill. No one's ever afraid when they go out and play a game of basketball that they will be unable to shoot the ball. Right? It's something that every single person can learn.
Yeah, I think go ahead, Samantha.
Okay. I tend to think of improv particularly in the context of like collaborative creation, which like role playing is. Improv is a set of tools that help you listen and respond actively. Like it's almost about establishing a sort of like presence and awareness of the people around you in the world that you're creating in a really immersive way. And I think that when you hone these skill sets, you become better at reacting kind of naturally in a given situation to what is presented to you. It's on the table.
Mm-hmm.
Right. What I that was more or less along the same lines I was going to say, but I want to add another layer to that, which is to say that it's about listening and paying attention and collaborating with everybody and being flexible with what you had anticipated was going to happen, right? That the important thing about improv is, or I guess to more functionally define collaboration, what it means is that the thing that you 100% wanted to and I'm sure is going to happen might not happen the way you want, and that is okay, and that can actually lead you to even more interesting things. And that's the biggest fear, I think, that is associated with improv, is the idea that you'll get it wrong, that you'll go up and make a mistake and that it won't work. And the only way an improvisational activity, and I should note, just on a side note, one of my favorite things about improv, about whether or not you can do it, is all of us improvise every conversation we have every day. So you are absolutely able to do it. The main thing you need to remember is that, like, you are not no one individual at the table is in complete control about what's going to happen in the game, and that what's going to happen in the scene or whatever, and that's okay, and that your game cannot be broken unless you allow it to be. And that's sort of the biggest hurdle to get over, is that you can't. Improv has no fail state, or the only fail state improv has is if everyone decides to stop playing.
Mm-hmm.
And as long as everybody's willing to play this way, it will work.
So let's give everybody tools to not rage quit.
Yeah,
Yes.
That's the big goal.
Yeah.
So the interesting thing about improv and improvisation is we're improvising all the time. Every conversation you've ever had, unless you're literally reading it off of a script, is improvised. You are getting stimulus and you are responding. And when you do that kind of improvisation on stage, you have a couple of kind of added goals. Instead of just talking to each other, you want to also kind of build a nice world, maybe make an audience laugh or cry. When you are improvising at the table, we see a lot of kind of what Sam described, this and I don't know if I'm going to get the term right, the shared narrative or the collaborative storytelling. Mm-hmm. It's the idea that all of us can contribute in some way to a narrative, instead of all of us rolling dice until we get a high enough number to move on to the next scripted step. So the act of improvisation, by simply acknowledging that it exists, is kind of a way to start incorporating it into your game. So the question, the second question is, we've talked a little bit about improv now and kind of what it is and what it means. So what are some techniques of improvisation that we can use to either GM a role-playing game or be a player in a role-playing game? What are techniques? And for my panelists here, kind of talk about the technique a little bit to define the term, and then kind of jump into how can we use this thing in the game.
Right. So the first one that comes to mind is, of course, the sort of cliche at this point, the yes and, right? The idea of saying yes to questions and then building upon that yes. So like, for instance, and the reason this works in improv, the reason this is important in improv is if you get on stage with another person, you don't know what you're doing, and someone says like, hey, would you like a cookie? And you go, no.
That's kind of not like a cookie. That's a small cat.
Right. Right. That's not a cookie. That's a cat. It's like, well, now someone has set out a thing, and then you went slapped it down, and now you got to start over.
Mm-hmm.
So, and incidentally, there are ways in which you can say like no and have it be constructive, but that's like a whole other conversation. The main thing that the way this applies to role playing is, if you're a GM, and I usually GM, so I'll talk mostly from the GM perspective. If you're a GM and you have a player who says, hey, I want to make a character who's secretly a prince. Now, you always run into like 4 or 5 people who want to do this kind of thing. Like, I want to be the secret chosen one. This happens a lot. Like my player's whole family was killed and he's on a mission for revenge to kill the ninja lord. And it's cliche, and maybe you're like, yeah, okay. But like, you know what you should do? You should say, yeah, okay, sure, let's do that. Yeah. As opposed to slapping it down, because first of all, the overall goal of a role-playing game is for everybody to have fun, ultimately, right? And when a player comes to you with a thing, with a crazy ass idea, no matter how crazy ass it is, like for instance, I was running a game yesterday, and they were like, hey, can we ship ourselves in giant boxes across a planet? And I was like, yeah, except why don't we make it water tanks? And like, so I was just like, yeah, absolutely, let's do that. We're going to do a whole thing. I set up a whole thing, allows them to do that because like, that's the thing they want to do. And by saying yes, you suddenly open up possibilities for new ideas and interesting things.
So many GMs, their default setting, because they have such an adversarial relationship with their players, is no. And you've got to ask yourself sometimes, why am I saying no? Like, I go into the bar. Is there a chandelier? No. Well, why can't there be a chandelier in this weird bar? Like, let's have a weird chandelier plan. I don't know what your plan is for it. Maybe you drop it on somebody. I don't know. Maybe you're going to swing from it. Maybe you just are creating it in your mind. Why? Why is it so important to your special GM plan that there not be a chandelier in there? Right? Have your default setting to turn it from no into yes.
Yeah,
right? It's not what you expect.
I've been playing a lot of games with limited rule and playbook opportunities, like things you can actually do in the game, like Apocalypse World settings. And instead of saying, okay, this is your only menu of things, unless it's explicitly reality breaking, it breaks your world, it's something that is prescribed in the rules. If a player's like, I would like to try to do this, I say, okay, let's do it, and let the dice decide. So set the difficulty according to what the task is, and don't just say, no, you can't try that. That's impossible. You'll never do it, unless it's actually something that breaks the world.
Yeah, I think a big thing about yes and as a concept is what you're saying yes to is a shared base reality between you and the other person you're playing the game with or you're sharing a scene with. Is that you're saying, yes, we are agreeing to the base reality that this is a cookie and it's not a cat. And similarly in games, you're even having established rules is saying yes to a base reality that like these are the rules and parameters. So and of the yes and is now within that reality that we've established, what can we do? Mm-hmm. And I think that sometimes you can get so fearful that saying yes might give people too much control or too much leeway in a situation. But I think in that case, when you're afraid to say yes because you're worried, but what if it fails, or what if it goes wrong, or what if it breaks the game, you kind of have to trust that you've said yes with these other people. You're all sharing a reality. You have a base level of trust that the other people are going to kind of respect the reality that you've created, and you can have so much fun and flexibility within those bounds.
I kind of want to expand off that and something Bobby mentioned earlier, which is about the adversarial relationship that often powers so many role-playing games. In that, in order for this to work, as Samantha points out, you need to have a shared understanding of what you're doing. And in order to have that shared understanding, you need to mutually trust one another that no one is out to ruin anybody else's fun. And that goes triple for the GM. The GM should not pose themselves as the adversary of the player. And I'm very firm on that, because if you think about it, it really doesn't make any sense. If you were actually their adversary, they'd just always die, because you have ultimate power. So you could just say, like, well, you first level characters run into a dragon, I win. Like,
undodgeable rock falls
the first
from the
time
heavens.
you go to sleep, bears.
Right. Obviously, nobody does that, because they're at a base understanding. We understand that the purpose of the GM is to facilitate fun, not win. And the best way to facilitate fun is to give the players interesting challenges and things that are fun, that they enjoy doing, that you also enjoy doing. I am a big proponent also of GMs having fun. And which, by the way, often gets glossed over. A lot of times the GM is posited as everybody's like story slave. Like, go work all week and then entertain me on the weekends, fool.
This is
And
true.
like, no. The GM also has a say in fun. Like, they definitely do. But the main thing you need to do is, as a GM, you need to trust that your players are not trying to trick you, because how and why? Like, you're not their adversary. Like, who cares? Like, oh, but then we're going to win super easily. Okay, but then I'm going to come up with something else that will also make it, or I'll make it more complicated in some way. Like, everything in a non-adversarial gaming situation is an opportunity, not an obstacle, and not an attack. And the players and GM both have to understand that and work with that in mind.
Yeah, and I think sometimes the feeling of like that adversary can sometimes come from, I know my first time GMing ever, I felt such a sense of control, because I had worked so hard to create something, and I felt so insecure that potentially the thing I created wasn't going to work, but that if it was going to work, it was going to work under the exact guidelines that I set out. It's like, I thought about this, and you know, I want to make this work because I want them to have the experience that I set out for them. And after that, I've only fully improvised GMing. I do not prep, I do not plan, because I'm not good at sometimes
Have
it's hard to
an
let go of
outline.
that.
Have an outline, and it's okay if you stray off the page, right?
Or don't have an outline and just
That's fine too.
So, hey, I was wondering, can I talk a little bit about session zeros, since we're talking about trust and all those things?
Absolutely.
So, just to kind of pull this back to the analogy of an improv show and your role-playing game, if you're in an improv show, let's say you're doing a long form show, which is something that usually continues for more than a couple of minutes and sometimes is based around a theme, you wouldn't necessarily throw a bunch of improvisers on stage together if half of them want to do like a magic or girls style show a la Sailor Moon and the other half want to do an 80s cop drama like Miami Vice. Like, they get on stage and there's going to be some tension about what they want to get out of the show, or maybe an awesome mashup, but probably tension. The same thing goes for a role-playing game. Having a session zero, which for those who have never had one before, is a session before your gaming actually begins, can help you to establish some of the things that you as a GM and that your players want out of your game. So obviously in your session 0, you're going to discuss your game system, like what are you going to use for rules. You can discuss things like your table rules. What kind of etiquette do you expect at your gaming table? What kind of behavior? Are there topics that people aren't comfortable with? Any house rules that you might have based on the system? And then you can go into campaign expectations. Is evil allowed? Is it something that's gritty and dark? Is it light and fluffy? Are you here just to have fun? Are you going to have one party goal, or are you going to allow individual goals to happen throughout the exploration of your campaign? Character creation sometimes happens at a session 0, but it is the thing that allows you to have trust, that allows you to play in an open way, because you establish all of these parameters ahead of time that you all agree on.
Yeah, folks, we're running an Arkham Horror. Everyone's gonna die, you know. So like you've got that expectation ahead of time.
Yeah.
I just want to point out that now I can't get the idea of a magical Sailor Moon girl cop drama out of my head, and
Wouldn't
like
that be
honestly,
sweet?
that would be pretty awesome.
I've been playing
heavily
Glitter Hearts
invested
right
in
now,
that game
so
happening.
I
I think session 0s are as important to, you know, creating a great, awesome shared reality and a shared set of expectations. Just as Melissa said, the cast of an improv show getting together backstage and talking about what the show's about to be is equally important. You know, it's about setting a set of rules, or to use Bobby's basketball analogy, defining the outline of the court. You can have all the kinds of fun you want within the court here, but these are the boundaries. And so long as you're good being there, then you're all going to have fun.
And also,
and just of note, if you are in a game right now, and it doesn't matter whether it's been going for a month or 6 years, and you're like, there is a situation that is toxic, and I need to talk to the players about this, do it. Like, have hey, we're going to talk for 30 minutes about my expectations and your expectations. We can check in about it. It's totally fine to do a session 0 in the middle of a session to right the ship.
Right. The thing I was going to say is that we're talking about session 0 as this formalized, like, complete session where everybody meets. We have very serious conversations about whether or not Ted can play because he's a jerk. You know, and like that's not fair. That's not really. I mean, I guess that can happen, but generally, in my experience, session 0s are informal conversations, and often are just contained in the email that I send to the people that want to play. As I'll say, like, "Hey guys, I'm going to run a game that's set in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. You're all going to play Space Marines."
And my question, of course, is: can we hide ourselves in a water tank to get into the base?
That's what. But you know, like, and so just going in, that's almost a session 0 right there. You understand what you're getting into. Okay, this is going to be very combat oriented. We're all going to be playing 7-foot-tall genetic super soldiers, and I imagine we're going to be shooting aliens and demons and stuff. So I think we get it, right? Like, it doesn't need to necessarily be this, like, okay, let's all sit around and talk about our do's and don'ts. Though it certainly can be that, and indeed, you know, in a broad sense, you as a GM need to be aware and sensitive to what your players want to do and what they're willing to tolerate, you know. But it doesn't necessarily need to be like, okay, everybody, you know, sign your name on the line. We're going to have a 3-hour workshop in which we discuss your emotional problems.
Although,
like,
to be fair, Auston,
great right now. I could use that.
A session 0 is, I'll admit, a lot more important when you're gaming with people for the first time or you don't know them as well, and you don't know what kind of expectations they have of you as a GM.
Totally true. Yeah.
So we have a question from our wonderful moderator. What happens when a session 0 chat breaks the group up? I've had mid-game chats break games up, and basically what happens is you splinter into, for us, we splintered into the two different, like one group wanted something a little more dark and a little like with a little more backstabbing, and the other group wanted something light and fluffy, and we just split up into 2 games. We had 2 different games going on. And if you disagree, it might just mean that it's not the right gaming group fit for you. You want to have that trust. It's a good time to find that out at the beginning, not the end.
Yeah, it's. I mean, this is a free hobby, except for all the dice we buy. It's a free hobby. It's not like someone's paying you to be there, which means you should be enjoying it. And where those, you know, that session 0 sets enough rules that, you know, essentially some people could self-select out. If you're lucky enough to be in a group of kind of kind of role-playing gamers that's like 10 or 15 people, you can kind of put out essentially like a casting call and say, hey, I want to run a game for like 4 people. It's going to be about pirates, but aside from that, I kind of want to tailor it to like what a subset of you would enjoy. So like fill out a form. How much do you want to do like intrigue? How much do you want to sail the 7 seas? How much do you want to just wander the earth murdering? So and based on that, I kind of Venn diagram it out, and then that's my group. It's definitely a lot trickier to get everyone on the same page if you've been gaming with the same group of like 5 people for 20 years and everyone's set in their ways. But it is possible.
If you don't like what you're doing, do something else. My favorite definition of stupidity is trying the same thing twice and expecting a different result, right? You got to get out there and try it a different way.
Yeah. I also think the few times I've had kind of a contentious, maybe mid session, talk, I think when something needs to be brought up, you either have to be explicit if it's something negative. I think that's when territory gets a little gets into the realm of maybe the group's breaking up. If it's negative, sometimes you just got to be explicit and specific about the thing that you're trying to address, rather than having an esoteric general group conversation that's like, the problem really is that John keeps talking over me when I'm trying to make a decision in a game, but instead we're going to have a group chat about how we all need to respect each other's boundaries. Sometimes you need to be direct.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Sometimes those conversations can get really passive aggressive and bitter if you're just not explicit about the thing you're trying to address. And if you try to instead say, I'm setting group boundaries, and sorry, not that group boundaries are bad, but when you try to solve a specific problem without being specific about what the problem is, it can get a little, I think, contentious and unproductive.
You're the director of a show, basically. And if you have an actor that keeps upstaging everybody, you're not going to talk to the whole cast about upstaging the rest of the cast. You're going to pull that actor aside in a kind way if they're your friend, and in a neutral way if you don't really know them that well. And you're going to say something like, so I really like your enthusiasm for what we're doing here, and I appreciate how much initiative you're taking, but we need to share the spotlight a little bit more, just so that the other players can, pursue their goals, or fight the dragon, or get inside the shipping crate, or whatever they're going to do.
Yeah, share the stage.
Share the stage.
Now, I know I said that we do plenty of Q&A at the end, but a great question just came through, and I think this really can frame up a lot of good stuff. So one question from the Discord chat, which, by the way, folks in the Discord chat that did not know we were live, we are definitely live. So feel free to just ask as many questions as you want, and we'll go nuts. We're improvising.
Yeah, if you have any songs you want me to play, let me know. I'll play it on the
Yeah,
keyboard.
we're taking requests. So the question is, how do you practice improv? I've always had this idea that you need to be quick creating ideas and responses. So that, I think, is a brilliant question. So have at it.
The quickness comes from not anyone being any smarter than anybody else, but from removing those blocks in your mind that tell you no. Like, I got to come up with a name for this character. Oh, it can't be that. Can't be that. It can't be that. Why couldn't it be your first idea? Like, the practice that you do frees your mind up to just fire the next thing out and not judge it, and that's hard. That's where the practice. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I also think, so like, how do you practice improv is closely linked in my mind to why do you practice improv, which I get a lot. It's like, well, if you're just going to go up on stage and make stuff up, why do you have to rehearse?
Return to my basketball analogy. If you've never played a game, you're not going to go great.
So the reason is because you need to build relationships and trust with the people you're doing it with. If you don't trust that the other person is going to pick up the thing that you drop on the table and go somewhere awesome with it, then it's not going to feel fun or productive. It's going to feel anxiety inducing. So how do you practice improv, especially in the context of a role-playing game? Do more relationship building outside of game sessions. Do like cocktail hours. hang out, build relationships outside of that setting so that you feel like you know the people you're playing with and you have a rapport and trust outside of that context.
Or Samantha, if I
Also
could
want to
add,
talk a minute.
in that setting, right? Like your friends, they get together and sometimes you hop right into like being elves and wizards. Like have like a half-hour check-in. How you doing? How your kids? What's going on? Is that thing on your neck still all right? You know, like whatever's going on. You know, it's
I wanna
fine to
say
have
something
to feel that for a couple minutes. Sorry, go
I
ahead.
want to say something about actual prep. About what, from a GM perspective anyway.
I have
and even
something
from
for
a player
perspective too.
even from a player perspective. But so we already talked about how, like, if you set up that like railroaded campaign where it's like, okay, first you're gonna get the job in the inn, then you're gonna go to the dungeon, you're gonna kill the Goblin King, and then you come back and get the money. And then like if they don't do it that way, you're gonna ruin the whole thing. Okay. I don't think you shouldn't prep anything. At least not if you're not experienced in doing this kind of thing. What I do think you should prep as a GM is not events, but situations and places and characters. I call it, the term I use is I sandbox my campaigns. Like I set up a square that is the realm, and then I set up a bunch of adversaries who are doing things in the realm, and I set up a bunch of places of interest that are important for some reason in the realm, and then I set up a bunch of things that are in the process of happening. And then I throw the characters in, and then they figure it out themselves. And all I have to do as the sandboxer is remember all the situations I've set up so that when players interact with a particular character, I can think, okay, so how does that affect everything else I've set up? And by not having anything rigidly set in stone, it enables you as the GM to be very loose and to react to what the players want to do and still basically tell this kind of story you want to tell. And it enables you to be very, very fluid. And I think moving away from plot and towards simply setting, situation, and character can actually help an awful lot in like that being quick. You know, you'll give off this sense like, oh my gosh, he was planned for everything. When really all you did was have like a skeletal structure of stuff that they just kept bouncing off, and then you just kept reacting to it.
It
and
fills
it's
in.
way easier.
And sorry, go ahead, Mel.
Mel, you had something about players, right?
Yeah, so this goes for when you're playing a character, either as a player or as a GM. You can kind of go back to one of the things that you learn as an improviser, but also as an actor in general, is to start with, for your character, a goal or a motive, and make that the heart of your character. Have a clear goal. And from there, you'll find what kind of actions or tactics are possible. Now, if you're a person who has trouble thinking of, I don't know what my character would do, and it takes you a while to process, do a little cheating. Write down your character's main goal in life, or a couple if they have a few, and then write down what are some tactics or strategies they would use for getting to that goal. Have a menu of things that you're comfortable playing out depending on situations. That's like a training wheel version of improv. Another thing that can be really helpful is to get into the practice of making first person active choices in character. I think that can be the hardest part for a lot of people who aren't improvisers or actors. So as a GM, the way you can foster this with your group is to put a place in your game at the beginning where stakes are low, and you're just giving your players a chance to talk in character and get used to that idea of the first person and the idea of speaking off the cuff. So, you know, they all meet in a tavern or something like that, and you give them the opportunity to talk and get used to just having their voice out there.
A couple of very small, very practical pointers if you want to start throwing improvisation into your games. Thing number one, let your players name the NPCs, right? Oh no, you run into a guy on the road and I don't know, who is he? Like just let him name Dr. Nematode. Yeah, sure, Dr. Nematode now, whatever. Other things you can do, like when they enter a place, you can have them describe it. Like if they know it, like you walk into a space bar, you can say, Jerry, what's in there? Oh, I don't know, some weird octopus alien playing an old school piano, like a Western. Like, oh, then that's there now, right? Let them fill in all the details. And the joy of that is it gives you a break as the GM. right? Because it's a lot that you're creating and having to stay on top of. And if you could let somebody else talk for like 30 seconds while you get your shit together, that's great. Like you've done a huge service and given you stuff to play off of and have fun with.
Yeah.
One thing I want to add to, Sam, go ahead.
I was going to add one thing also as kind of like a quick tip, kind of like an expanding on what Melissa said. Have a goal for your character, but don't get trapped into thinking that goal has to be big or like large. Like I need to solve the mystery of where, how my father went missing when I was a child. Because it can be hard to kind of make that concrete and how translate how does that drive my character's decision. Because that's something that's been hard for me with characters. My character that I think I've had the most consistency and felt the closest connection with is a little drow rogue who loves creepy things. She collects, like, things die around her. She puts the ooze that comes out of that creature's nose into a little glass bottle and puts it in her pocket. And as I slowly start to act on that one fact about my character, she loves just kind of the creepy stuff no one else likes. I start to build how she acts in certain situations and how build out her point of view of the whole world. And now that I've played her for a couple of years, I know how she's going to respond in certain situations. But it all started from that one nugget of she's going to collect goblin snot, and it's
as a player, it's a really powerful improv tool as you're creating a player or creating character and having that character interact with the world is the idea of, well, if this is true, what else is true? As a guide, it's start, yes, do you want to avenge your father? Of course you do. But if you just like creepy things and you collect cool creepy things and you're in a situation and you think, well, I want to improvise more. I don't just want to follow a script. What should I do? Well, okay, if I like creepy things, do I also like mysteries? Yeah, I do. I also like mysteries. And so, you start developing a detective-y vibe for your character. You start from a little spot and start growing. I actually have one other tip for Bobby's point about naming as a GM, letting your players name NPCs. That's awesome. Another fun, quick tip on incorporating improv in is when you come up with a puzzle or a trap or something like that, don't also come up with the solution. Say, all right, well, there's a 15-foot deep pit with a foot of water in the bottom. Go nuts, everybody.
That mission you two guys are on, Serpico and Bobby are in a game I'm running. That mission you're on, I don't have any idea.
I love that.
We're already in the water tank.
Yeah, we're already sealed in a tank.
So far, you're in a water tank being mailed there. Anyway, I want to say this is just a brief story. I had one of my favorite characters I've ever played was in a campaign actually Bobby ran ages and ages ago. And he was a swordsman, and his basic ruling underlying character trait was he hated bullies. And so I made a rule with that character that anytime some giant, powerful person, no matter how giant and powerful they were, was picking on someone weaker than them, I called him out.
Yes.
Even if it almost certainly meant my almost immediate death. There's a point this is a 7th Sea game, and the Queen of the She was being a jackass to somebody, and I called her out to her face. And then she turned my girlfriend into a desk. And still, I was I knew full well that I could possibly lose my character by doing this, but there's no way that character wouldn't say something.
And please make mistakes.
Yeah.
These people are not real, and they're not you. They'll be fine.
A good GM,
and it's still fun.
A good GM will make a mistake have just as much importance and weight and a spotlight as a success. If you fail, it should be spectacular. It should be something that you want to clap afterwards. And also
Sam,
should leave a little kernel at the end that you can grab on and keep playing with.
Sam, could I ask you to describe what just happened in Knights of Prospect on Saturday to exemplify this point?
Sure. Okay. So we were tasked with rescuing a girl who had run away from home into a band of thieves, a cult of thieves, effectively. And we decided to two of us decided to stack on top of each other, wear a trench coat, and our name was Cowboy.
Classic. Love
and
it.
then another person covered themselves in mud to disguise themselves, because we were fairly well known in the area, and called themselves Mudman. And then Mudman and Tallboy kidnapped the fourth member of our party to bring them as like a sacrifice. And then basically the head of the thieves called us on our bluff, and we had to injure the fourth member of our party who we captured, and we failed so spectacularly at fake injuring them that we killed them instantly. And now they're trapped in a scepter, and it's a whole it failed spectacularly, but it was also the best moment of that whole show.
As a player, it should be
Right.
your job to get in trouble.
Yeah.
And it should be the GM's job to make that trouble interesting,
Mhm.
as opposed to you just dying, right? Like, so as my favorite players throughout the years have always been the players that are like, I am going to stir the pot. I'm going to cause shit to go sideways. And that is always because, and I say this, I've said this probably on every time we've done this panel, but I'm going to bring it up again. You are never going to tell the story about the time you planned a mission in a D&D game and it went perfectly and everything went straight and nobody got hurt and it was all great. And all of a vast majority of you people out there think that's what you want. And I'm telling you that it ain't true, because the best times you've ever had, and you know it's true, the best times you've ever had is when things go completely sideways and everybody almost dies and you have to like light the gnome on fire and use them as an improvised catapult stone. And that is the best thing ever. And you tell everybody about it for years. So thank you, Melissa. So like
Yeah.
that should be your goal. And the goal of the GM is to A, encourage that kind of thing, because everybody likes things that go nuts, and B, make sure that when things go nuts, it doesn't just immediately end in miserable failure and everyone, and you don't just go like, well, obviously you all die. And like, that's
on
no
your
fun.
point, Austin, absolutely, that's on the GM. Your players will react to how you are rewarding them.
Mhm.
If someone makes a mistake and they step out of line and you kill them, everybody goes, all right, let us not try anything, like that's not what you want.
That character that Sam described, that was that inadvertently died during a number of exciting failed poor choices, and by poor I mean brilliant choices. He is now trapped in a soul gem with his best friend that he had trapped in a soul gem 20 years earlier. So the reward for making big choices is going to be huge. You don't need to roll a 20 on the dice to get rewarded for a great decision. You can't control what's on the darn dice. All you can control is saying, I want to do something. We got to kill that dragon. I want to jump off a cliff with a knife in my hand to do it. And if you succeed, it's a hell of a story. If you fail, it's a hell of a story.
Yep.
I
you
have a
fall
great
into
question.
the dragon's nest, and it now considers you one of its clutch of eggs.
Awesome.
Like whatever.
Yeah, and that's how it's going to work. I have a great question from the group. This will pivot us to this grim modern era that we're in.
Oh my God.
So this question, it's about politics. No. The question is, so improv for me normally relies a lot on visual cues. You play off the other person and use that energy. But now that much of our gaming is online, are there any tips for improv over Zoom, Discord, whatever?
Wear costumes. Dress up.
That's not for everybody. I think that art, and to be honest, like again, I consider this kind of art what we do as much as it's a ludicrous thing to say. Art thrives on restrictions. If I just say, paint me a picture, you go, oh God, a white canvas? I don't know what to do. If I say, paint me a bat, you have a direction to go and you have something to play off of. I've thought a lot about watching She-Ra with my daughter. They did an amazing job with a terrible 80s cartoon, because they took all the themes and things that were there, even though they didn't make much sense at the time. For this, we're in a different realm where things are different, but that only means that you can explore it in a different way. You can you can have people figure stuff out on the chat. Like I run a game in the the Tales from the Loop role-playing universe, and these characters interacted with the computer, and I was like, oh god, I don't want to talk as the computer because I think that sounds dumb. It's like, oh, they're gonna have a typing interface, and they just like, we had like 45 minutes of like quiet typing as they were typing questions to the computer mind, and I was answering as the computer, like, and it was awesome. You just got to see it as something that would be a benefit to you.
I do think you can use the internet a lot better to your advantage in a multimedia sense. So like, as I've alluded to, I'm running a 40K role-playing game. Serpico and Bobby are playing in it right now. And there's a huge wealth of 40K art out there, tons and tons and tons and tons of it. And I have like a giant file full of it. And so like, when we run into something, or they come up with an idea they want to do, sometimes I'll just oh, that reminds me of an image. I'll throw an image on the screen and I'm like, okay, this is where you are. Some sort of like dystopian hellscape kind of thing. And then that is sort of like an offer in an improv sense, where it's like, okay, so that's what they look like, or that's what that thing is. Can I react to that? What options do I have around that? And what can I do with it? And in so doing it, you know, it's an advantage I didn't have before, in that like the descriptions sometimes I can just sort of like improvise or not really bother with. I ran a game that was like also online, that was a cop drama, and it was all set in San Diego, and so I had a bunch of stock locations like that, like, you know, like the docks and stuff, and so I'd throw up a picture of like a container port, and just by throwing that on the screen, suddenly they have something to react to, and then they start saying like, okay, can I climb on top of that thing? And I'm like, yeah, officially that container exists now because it's on the image I randomly found on an image search. So that's one thing I've been doing. Go ahead, Melissa.
Go ahead, Sam, and then I'll speak after.
I was gonna say something I've played with a little bit, and I've been itching to play with more, is, so when you're doing traditional tabletop games in a room with other people, everyone who's thinking about doing something says what they're thinking about doing out loud, and everyone meta understands what's going to happen before it happens in character. You have the option to message the DM privately. You have the option to have individual sessions with your players to build out what they're doing, in the town during their downtime. And then when you come all together, those can be revealed in a surprising, interesting way to the other players, in a way that you don't really have when you're all in the same room. So that's something I've played with a little bit, and I'd love to play with more, and I think is a cool way to build in like surprise, and even if it seems planned when you're like collaborating to build like a secret thing, it's still surprising to the other players once it's revealed to them. And that builds a moment of improv where all of a sudden you have these characters who, instead of thinking in their chair like, oh, okay, she's going to do that, and I feel like my character would probably react this way, instead of having that, you just have them reacting spontaneously. And it can be really fun to have that level of surprise that I think that doing, you know, role-playing over or Zoom or whatever, there's more opportunity for that in a cool way.
So I have just some short practical things for just acting and doing improv over Zoom in general. The first one is recognize that it's more difficult. Recognize that it's not a three-dimensional forum, and it's harder to read visual cues. And because of that, there's been studies on this, it's actually more exhausting for your brain. So make your campaign, your sessions shorter, take more breaks, let people have more breaks so they can focus better. It's much harder to focus during Zoom. Another thing that comes up a lot in my acting classes, but also when I play games online, is it's hard to tell who's talking to who. Use names often than you think you would. Like in an in-person game, you might just look at the person or turn to face them. Use names frequently so there's no confusion. And the last one is, and it's kind of related to the names thing, make it even more clear when you're in and out of character. So if you have something that you're saying to the other players, not as your character, maybe have a hat that you take off or put on. It could be a physical item that you use as a visual cue, or just have a different voice, or make it very clear, just so that, because we don't have as much to work off of in the space visually, have some kind of system where they know when you're in character.
I also want to add that you can make this a multimedia experience too. One of my favorite moves of GM moves of all time was Auston ran a game. He ran a Shadowrun game, and then somebody was like, "Oh, I want to hack this computer," and he said, "I hate the hacking rules for Shadowrun," and he pulled out Super Mario 64 and he plopped it in and he threw him the controller. He said, "All right, you got 3 minutes. For every red coin you get, you're going to get another degree of information from this hack." Oh my
That was
God,
fun.
it was awesome. Like
The
you
look on
can do
his
that.
face was priceless. It was priceless.
So there's another really interesting question came in. It's very, very tactical, but I think this group is the absolute perfect group for it. Because we've been talking a lot about, the tropes of walking into a tavern and hanging out in a tavern. But someone asked, what are your thoughts on essentially a dry game? And I take that to mean like a game that doesn't involve just like everyone getting hammered on mead and waiting for like a prince to walk in to give you a quest. So group thoughts on dry games, or by extension, if we want to make that a broader topic, kind of avoiding certain tropes that we think might be played out.
I think the important thing here is to think about what are the opportunities to bring people together in your world that you've created outside of a tavern. For example, right now I'm playing in a game of Glitter Hearts, which is the Magical Girls game that is based in the Apocalypse World system. And we are all at a private school, and we have things like school dances. We have things like prom committee meetings. Those are the opportunities to gather and share ideas. And it's not centered around alcohol or drinking. It shouldn't be, we're teenagers. But find in your group, what are the other opportunities for community? It's just like we have so much important things that happen in our online communities now. What are your important communities in your game?
I very much encourage people not to use the tavern trope, mostly because it's dull and so done. And there's so many other things you can do. And as a non-drinker myself, I can assure you of the drinking world, there's lots of things to do that don't involve beer, and that you should explore. It's sort of to take that idea and then just sort of like, how do we start it in a non-typical way? My favorite way to start every game is a game where all the characters already know each other. You already know each other. You already are working together in some way, and we just dispense with that stupid artificial nonsense. We're like, well, we got to meet somewhere so we can have an adventure. It's like, guys, you're all sitting around the same table. Just like already be on the job. Like just start in medias res or something.
You're dividing up the gold from your last successful heist.
Like there's so many other ways we can do it. You really do not have to have that whole rigmarole where it's like, okay, now introduce your character to everyone. Just go and say, like, we already know each other. We've been adventuring together for years. Now, that's not to say you can't have them meet, but like, I think it's so much easier if you just say everybody knows each other.
Yeah.
I also think something I love to play with is rather than, relying on tropes of going into a tavern and you're waiting on the guy who sent you a message and he's going to give you a quest. I love environment, like exploration. And so I'm thinking of a time when I ran a campaign and this was fully improvised and I didn't know what their goal was going to be. I didn't know what the arc of this session was going to be. They were walking in the woods and I said, something strange just happened. Someone describe it for me. And someone was like, oh, we heard a weird whistle out in the forest. And I was like, well, how do you want to react to that? Do you want to keep going? Do you want to go investigate the whistle? And just using those cues, like, okay, what's the sound that was interesting? Now go, what do you see that is odd or out of place that you wouldn't typically find in a forest? Kind of asking a string of questions that leads you to this mysterious thing that kind of organically gets built. And I might have an idea after a couple rounds of questions where it's like, okay, I think they've described this weird whistle. They are going to run into a trap of this person who's trying to to trick all the druids who live in the area into falling into these pits in the ground. And so I'll start to come up with maybe an idea in my head, and then it's like up to them to discover it. But they're going to continue to pull apart little pieces of the environment and just slowly get there. And it's also narratively interesting. It's cool when I don't know how it's starting, but when you start really small and focus and dive deep on that one little thing and then start to expand out and follow it, it can be a really cool way to start a game without feeling like you're falling into, traditional tropes.
It's a little bit like that improv game, Follow the Action,
Mm-hmm.
where you start off with like one scene and then a player will leave the scene and you follow where they go and you see what's important to them by the scene they start. And then within that scene, another player might leave and you'll start to dive deep into this world that they've created, and you'll see what they find interesting by what they choose to start as each scene progresses.
Something I've always wanted to try and never actually have is a collaboratively built world, in which you start everybody say, okay, you come up with a basic setting idea. Okay, medieval Europe, sure, whatever. You start in a town, and then like everything outside of that town and the kingdom they live in, and like what's going on in the kingdom and so on and so forth, is stuff that the players determine as we go. And that they basically have investment in creating this whole world that I then am just in charge of managing. Now, part of the reason for doing that is because I don't want to think it up anymore, but like, the other part is that is like a pure improvised game, and that it totally, like, the whole world you created is totally different and new, and everyone would have big investment in it because they would have made it, and it would have been a ton of fun. Because one of the main things you need is buy-in, right? You need the players to buy in to what you're doing, and if they're in on it, it's great.
That's one of the big mechanics in Knights of Prospect, which is the show that Samantha and I are in. Is because it's essentially half live play and half improv show, we really want to show the audience that really we're doing a lot of improv, and I don't have some secret screen with a bunch of notes and settings. So often at the start of a show, I'll say, okay, well, you're in a town. I want one of you to name the town, and I want every other person to give me a sentence about what makes the town interesting. And boom, now we have our town. All I knew going in was, in that town, the mayor's been kidnapped. But everything else is built, everything is built by the players in full view of the audience. And what's fun is you really can, in terms of setting, in terms of character motivations, you can give up so much control to your players and still ultimately make it be about the thing you, the GM, want it to be about, which is like, oh, we got to rescue someone that's been kidnapped. Everything else is up for grabs.
Players are horses.
When you're stumped.
Go ahead, Auston.
Oh, sorry. There's a really quick. This reminds me of a really quick stump trick. Like, so say somebody fumbled on a roll, and you need to come up with something that happens to them, and you can't think of what it is. You go around the table and ask each person to give you what could the result of that fumble be. And because they naturally want to one up each other, the ideas will get progressively weirder. And then you roll a die based on the number of people there, and that's the thing you pick. If you're ever stuck, do that. It's always great. It's tons of fun.
I also had, before a session started, I had people drop pictures of random places, like someone drew a picture of like a mobile home with weird waves coming out of the top, and after I kept them, and then whenever I needed a new location, instead of thinking about it, I just shuffled through the pictures of locations that they drew, and I pulled it out, and I was like, this is where we're going.
Here's
That's
where we are
cool.
today.
That's awesome.
If you've never done it before, it sounds terrifying to go into a game where, like, I only know a couple of things. Like, there's a villain and there's this and there's, like, but you can come across as such a genius when you leave yourself all these breadcrumbs in the story. Like, oh my God, when that person they passed on the path with the baby carriage in the first session is actually the big villain. Like you can. There's so much that when you create it together seems so much more impressive and awesome and fun.
Yeah, and if there is a mistake, like if there's confusion, if there's a mistake, it's okay to say, "Oh, we were not on the same page. Let's rewind a little bit and reset."
Oh my God, absolutely! Oh, that did not happen. Or you know what? Words everybody's afraid to say as a GM. I don't know.
Yeah, take a break. Figure it out.
Give me a minute. Everybody
Give
go
me
get
1 minute.
some pizza rolls, and I'm going to think about this for a minute. And whether
Now I want
that to
pizza
happen.
rolls, Bobby.
Yeah, they're so good. So we have about 30 seconds left. This has been a jam-packed hour. So obviously, everyone watching, thank you all so much for watching. But before we go, can I ask each of these very august panelists to give us like one sentence to end on, one parting thought, one parting shot?
Get in trouble, and
Love it.
trust that the GM is going to make that trouble lots of fun. And that's the key to the greatest role-playing sessions I ever had.
The GM gets to cheat, and the players get to win.
Even as a GM, you're allowed to be curious about the things that happen. That's not just a state the players have to be in.
I would just say, share the storytelling and don't have so much pride as a GM that you're afraid to do that.
And I'll close out with mine, which is the players and the GMs are all on the same team, and it is the story team. And you're all going to work together to build one. Folks, enjoy the rest of PAX Online. Thank you all so much for coming to this panel. We love doing it live at PAX East, and we love doing it here. Thank you for having us. Good night,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Yay!
Bye.